Thanks for joining me. I'm glad you're here. There's been a little bit of confusion when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 editions, the updates, and the base Switch versions. So we'll go ahead and just discuss the differences between these various versions. The Switch 2 has launched. It's very exciting. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm very interested in this console. And I do know that many of the people subscribed here are here for the variety content. They want the funny jokes, the useful development stuff, and then the random topics as well. That's just for fun, some cool hobbies and outdoor stuff. So I will try to get back to making sure that I have a good variety of content. I know a lot of you are here for the variety. But my time is very limited because of work. I have other responsibilities. I'm taking on new contracts. I have more people asking me to take on more contracts to do work in the games industry. So I'm trying to balance that out. It's pretty tough for me to catch up in the comments, but I'll do my best. So please be sure to stay tuned. I think my next video will be the guide on how to set up your blow dart gun and then give a demo and example. And I'll put a link if you want to grab one of these. These are so much fun. They're so cool. Projectile weapons, throwing weapons, they're awesome. But of course, it's all about safety. Be careful. If they hit a hard surface, they can bounce back, hit you in the eye. Okay, so let's go ahead and start discussing the differences between the Nintendo Switch 2 editions, the free updates, and the Switch versions. First, we will discuss the Switch 2 editions. These are upgrades to games that were previously launched on the first Switch, the original Switch. The Switch 2 editions enhance these games, so whether you purchase the game physically or digitally, you can still play the game on both Switch and Switch 2. But if you purchase the Switch 2 editions, there may be significant enhancements and upgrades in terms of new gameplay features. You will find that the game will add more things for you to do, and that the game can use the full console resolution. If you play in handheld mode, the game will run at 1080, and if you play on docked mode, you'll find that you can play up to 4K, and the game will not have to reduce the resolution in order to have decent performance. Games generally will run well, and the resolution can use the 4K and the DLSS upscaling. So a Switch 2 edition has access to all Switch features. This includes mouse controls, ray tracing, HDR, and again 4K docked and 1080 handheld. This is dependent on the game as well. Not every game will implement all of those features, but of course you will benefit from faster loading and better performance. So a Switch 2 edition is the most improved, special, shiny, shimmery version. Again, the Switch 2 editions are for games that are available on Switch and have been enhanced for Switch 2 with extra features. The Switch 2 edition is something that you buy, you pay for. So far, we have seen that the upgrades don't cost that much, so I'm very personally glad to see that upgrade option. Next, we will discuss the Switch 2 updates. These are not Switch 2 editions. When you boot up the game, you will see the logo in the bottom right still says Switch instead of Switch 2. So an example of this would be Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom. The Switch 2 updates are free. They allow the game to use the full resolution of the console, so that's 1080 in handheld mode and up to 4K in docked mode. This allows games to use the full resolution and HDR. If the game was previously locked to 30 FPS, it can be raised higher depending on the update. As we've seen, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and Echoes of Wisdom, the games ran basically at a maximum of 30 frames a second on the original Switch, but on the Switch 2, because of the Switch 2 updates, the frame rate has been increased, so the games can run at 60 FPS. These games could potentially use HDR, they could potentially use other controller options, but we haven't seen that yet, and in general, it would take a significant amount of work in order for the developers to implement new controller options such as the mouse controls, because that's something that is a new feature, takes more programming, and that's something that we would see in Switch 2 editions. So if a game has a Switch 2 update, it is still a Switch game. The exact same version of the game will run between the Switch and Switch 2, but we have seen some adjustments and improvements. For example, with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Switch 2 update fixes some things like stuttering animations for NPCs, the amount of Pokemon that can exist in one area. So there can be changes that developers can make that are minor but helpful improvements, but they are not huge and major. They don't change the gameplay in any way. The games benefit from faster loading and better performance because the Switch 2 itself is just stronger. So those are the Switch 2 updates. There can be some changes, but not a lot of really new features that change the core experience. So these are free. You don't pay for these. They're pretty small updates, but basically you're getting better frame rate and higher resolution, and that's really what you're looking at. Lastly, we will discuss Switch version. These have not been updated for the Switch 2, so these are just the base Switch versions running on Switch 2. There have been no individual enhancements, but the games do benefit from universal enhancements. For example, all Switch games running on Switch 2, unless there are some minor exceptions due to unless there are some incompatibility issues, Switch games running on Switch 2 will have faster loading and better performance. This means higher frame rates, less stuttering, smoother gameplay. The resolution does not change. So when you are playing in handheld mode, you are still looking at 720. When you're playing in dock mode, it is a maximum of 1080, but many games do not output at 1080, and the internal rendering resolution is even lower. And of course, this is so that games can try to run a little bit better and have better performance on the original Switch, which was always a bit of a struggle on the original Switch. Graphics are basically exactly the same as they were on the original Switch, with some very minor improvements due to the way that Switch 2 filters 2D textures. So, again, graphics are mostly the same, but it varies from game to game. Some games do check the frame rate manually or on a game engine level, and then the game dynamically reduces or raises the rendering resolution to try to improve the frame rate, but there's always a maximum limit to this, so that some games will actually run at a higher rendering resolution just based on the fact that the Switch 2 runs the game at a higher frame rate that allows their internal frame rate check to say, oh, the frame rate's fine, then we can just increase the resolution a little. So some games, depending on the game itself, depending on how it implements dynamic resolution adjustments, some games will look better on Switch 2 on that merit, but not all games will apply in the same way. For example, in one of my games, Silver Falls Episode Prelude, on Switch, you can press the minus button to manually change the game's rendering resolution to fit your taste. But on the Switch 2, you can just leave it at the highest setting, but even at the highest setting, it's still not running at maximum resolution. So at some point in the future, I would like to do a Switch 2 update that will be free so that we can take advantage of full rendering resolution and higher frame rate. Thanks very much for joining me today, and I hope this has been interesting and informative to you. Take care, be well, and again, do check in. I am working on that video where I'll be walking you through how to set up your blow dart gun and how to use it. Take care.